Is the pro-metabolic diet really everything people say it is? We're going to talk about that and more today. First off, there's a new diet in town. What is this diet? It's the pro-metabolic diet. I'm going to use air quotes here because it's not really a diet, but it is a buzz going around. You probably know somebody who's following this dietary model themselves, or you're interested in doing it for yourself. Either way, I'm going to cover all of that and more in this video today. My name is Brian. I've been following a pro-metabolic approach to my nutrition and lifestyle for the past 10 years. Overall, this is the thing that I have found that has been more comprehensive about health, about mindset, about movement and exercise than any other diet I've ever followed. And I have followed several. I've been low carb, I've considered plant-based, I've done all sorts of things with a very staunch level of research and enthusiasm. Every time I followed these diets, I always got broken. Everything got worse and I never felt better, and every single diet was missing some key points that the pro-metabolic diet talks about. Okay, so the pro-metabolic approach is basically a different lens to view health and wellness and nutrition through. The idea of a pro-metabolic approach is an idea that has was originally posited by a man named Ray Peat, Dr. Ray Peat to be exact. Dr. Ray Peat has been researching nutrition and endocrinology for almost 60 years. So think about that for a second. 60 years he's been researching these fields. And what puts him into a unique position is that over those 60 years, he has seen key changes in the historical realm of academia, medicine, and culture and society as a whole. And he has been able to put together key pieces of how our understanding around health, wellness, nutrition, how all of that has been shaped and cajoled into this weird construct we have now called the health and wellness world. And so through a pro-metabolic approach, Ray Peat's work, the essence of the pro-metabolic diet, is very much about getting you to break free from these other dietary and health and wellness models that in his mind and in my mind are actually making a lot of people sick. So first of all, when we talk about a pro-metabolic diet or the pro-metabolic approach, I want to cover what it's not. Because a lot of people will come to the pro-metabolic world from previous diets and previous experiences with other diets with a sense of confusion and oftentimes with a sense of desperation. And if you come into this with the wrong mindset, it's very easy to get lost in the wrong details to focus on. Won't worry, I'm going to give you those details here in a little bit. There's some key points that I want to make sure you understand as to how we got here, what we're doing, and what we're definitely not doing in the pro-metabolic approach. Okay, so first off, what the pro-metabolic diet is not. The pro-metabolic diet is not a diet about restrictions. Okay? If you think of, say, the low-carb or ketogenic community, they're very much about restricting certain food groups, in particular carbohydrates. The idea that carbohydrates are a problem, their model is built around avoid carbohydrates. Don't eat carbohydrates, problem solved. And on its surface, it sounds great. And the reason a lot of people are successful with it, or how they think they're successful with it, is that they follow that rule. They say, I'm not eating carbs, therefore I'm following this diet, therefore I'm successful. But there's more to nutrition, and there's definitely more to health than whether or not you're following a set of rules. When it comes to vegan and plant-based diets, the rules are don't eat animal products. That's the rule. If you don't eat an animal, then you're successfully following a vegan diet. And so within most dietary models, they're very heavily based a lot of times on restrictions. Don't eat these things. Don't ever eat these things. They can never be good for you. You cannot be successful if you eat these things. And that sets people up for failure for lots of reasons we're going to talk about shortly, but not the least of which is that it promotes this disconnect from food and promotes a disconnect from your body. So first of all, there's no restrictions in the pro-metabolic approach. We're very much not about restricting things. Second thing, we're definitely not about fear. Some people come into these dietary models with a sense of fear about food or about health or about disease. And from the pro-metabolic standpoint, we're trying to think about things differently and assessing whether or not something warrants our concern. But if I sit there and say, if I eat an animal product, I'm going to get cancer. Well, that fear is instilled into that vegan or plant-based diet. And that's something that can be a huge driver for decision making. And this is a huge tool used in propaganda. It's a huge tool used in marketing. If you can drive an emotional response, you can create adherence. And so a big part of a lot of these diets is they lean heavily into the fear. Oh, if you eat sugar, if you eat carbohydrates, the world's going to explode and your head's going to pop off and you're going to get diabetes and all these bad things. And the reality is that's not a physiologically sound model. It's an appeal to emotion. It's a conversational tactic used to create compliance in things like cults. And it's a big part of why people don't really understand why they don't feel better when they follow a certain diet and why they have problems that they can't fix on that diet. So we are definitely not about fear when it comes to the pro-metabolic approach. The other thing that pro-metabolic diets are not about is the exclusion of major food groups. So you'll have food groups, or you'll have diets where they say fat is the problem. Eat very low fat, fat is the devil. You'll have diets that say carbohydrates are the devil. You'll have diets that say protein is the most important thing, just eat protein and everything else sorts itself out, to the exclusion of other macronutrient groups. We're very much not a dietary approach of exclusion. We don't care what you eat. We care about whether or not you get the effects you want from that. And then fourth, this is kind of something we already touched on. A lot of the success that people measure in most diets is built around whether or not you're following the rules, whether or not you're scared enough, or whether or not you're excluding that thing. And that's not really going to connect you with your health. It's not going to connect you with your body. It's not going to connect you with the powerful goals that you want to accomplish in life. By saying, oh, well, I'm just going to exclude these things and hope that everything gets better. That's the model that most diets follow. And that's a big part of why a lot of people aren't successful, or why a lot of people will strictly adhere to something and fall apart. Because that rule was externally imposed. That rule was created arbitrarily by some guru somewhere that had their own orthorexic issues, their own disconnect with their food, their own hard relationship with their father that messed them up dietarily, and they have a body dysmorphic image of themselves, or whatever it is. So they create this program and then tell everybody to do it and use fear to sell them on this. These external constructs disconnect you from how your food is affecting you. We're very much not that way in the pro-metabolic world. So the pro-metabolic world is not a diet based on restrictions, not a diet based on exclusions or fear or externally focused rules. On the opposite side of that, what the pro-metabolic diet is completely different. We're very much antithetical to most diets, and this is why I used the air quotes in the beginning. It's an approach. It's a way of thinking. It's a lens to view the world through. So what the pro-metabolic diet is it's a diet of concepts, and in particular, biochemical concepts. We get pretty deep at some points, looking at how these things interact in the body, how foods and supplements affect the body. So when we start thinking in terms of concepts, we then start to make a tool set. We start to have a different way of managing our current situation to say, right now is when I want to borrow from this concept. Right now is when I want to borrow from that concept. And how do I mix the best of this and that for what I think I want at this time, or what my body is telling me I need at this time? And that brings us to point number 2. Point number 2 is very much about including foods rather than excluding foods. Okay, we don't want to exclude certain food groups entirely. We want to understand from a biochemical level how every food group works so that we can start to figure out which food groups we want more of or less of at that time based on our health, based on our history, based on our goals, and based on what our body is telling us it needs. So we don't really care whether you get predominantly fat or carbs or protein. We care about whether or not it gives you the response that you're looking for. And by that token, it's more of a lens and an approach than a specific set diet. Thirdly, what we're looking at most of all is experiment. Okay? By experiment, I mean we're looking at if you take in a food or if you take in a supplement, how does it affect you? You're going to be experimenting a lot with foods on a daily basis to see if it's giving you the desired effect that your physiology needs at that time. And so when you have the permission to experiment and find what works best for you, you're now no longer stuck in the confines of a diet. You're no longer stuck in this box that somebody else puts you in that says you can only eat these things or you can never eat these things. You now have the opportunity to start to look at your situation and make decisions for yourself. And that brings us to the fourth point. The pro-metabolic approach is very much about your bodily autonomy. Okay, what that means is that if you're craving salt, there's probably a reason for that, and you should probably seek out why that is. Maybe you need more salt. Maybe you've been working out a lot and sweating a lot, or it's really hot and humid where you're at, and you need more sodium because of how much you're wasting or burning through by being in the heat. So then by having more salt in the diet, you can take in that salt because your body's telling you to do so. Now, if I put you in a situation, a box, that said you can never eat beyond 2,000 milligrams of salt, your sodium can never go that high, well, now we just ignored all about your climate, all about your activity level, all about the heat and the ability of your body to maintain thermoregulation through sweating. We ignore all of that if I put you in that box. So in a pro-metabolic world, we say, well, you have permission to listen to your body. You have permission to get back to connecting to your body, to figure out what it is your body is telling you and how do you make the most of that information. How do you make decisions based on that information? Okay? That's why the pro-metabolic approach is not really a diet, because you have the opportunity to think for yourself through bodily autonomy. You have permission to experiment, to figure out if something helps or hurts you. You have an entire menu of foods and food groups to choose from to make those decisions, to run those experiments, and there is nothing off the table as far as foods to choose from. And most importantly, it's really just concepts and education. The more you can think about your situation, the more tools you have to understand and interpret your situation, the better the experiments you'll run, the more autonomy you'll have, the better your choices will be when it comes to your health especially. Okay? So who is the pro-metabolic approach for? Generally speaking, and this is how I found out about the pro-metabolic diet, but generally speaking, you're going to find the pro-metabolic approach, or if you're watching this video, you landed here because you're looking for information or solutions to your problem. Most people end up here when other diets failed them. Okay? Most people will end up here because other diets have set them up for failure because it's a diet based on rules, restrictions, exclusions, and external guidance, external landmarks of success. They didn't have autonomy. They didn't have permission to experiment and find what works for them or what is giving them the situation that they are feeling. They had food groups excluded from them, so they didn't get an entire nutrient group or sometimes multiple nutrient groups. And most of all, they were scared into compliance. By not following that model, the pro-metabolic community is very supportive of you being able to heal and repair your metabolism. So the name from the onset is pro-metabolic. What pro-metabolic means is it's pro, it's for for improving, it's going to promote, and then metabolic, which means metabolism. So the pro-metabolic approach promotes metabolic function. So when you have a dietary model geared towards increasing and improving your metabolism, what ends up happening is that you're going to see a change in the cellular functions that your body is promoting and turning over. So when we think in terms of healing a wound, a 12-year-old kid falls down, scrapes their knee, gets right back up, no scar, they're healed in a few days, everything's good. As you age and your metabolism slows down, you fall, you scrape your knee, it takes a lot longer to heal, and you're probably going to end up with a scar. So when we are looking at a benchmark to aim for, one of the big things that we're aiming for is increasing your metabolism and your metabolic function to be as close to and approximate to a very youthful, healthy, fast-acting metabolism. A metabolism that makes you very resilient towards the outside world. And so when you're coming to the pro-metabolic world for the first time, you're usually coming into it with some degree of metabolic issue. Maybe you're not healing well. Maybe you're having a skin issue. Maybe you have hair falling out that you don't like. Maybe you have low testosterone. Maybe you have low libido. Maybe you have terrible sex drive. Maybe your sleep is awful. And you're just tired of having all these situations. So people that come to this are usually at wit's end for trying to solve their problem. And fortunately, there's a lot more opportunity for tools in the pro-metabolic approach to help improve their problem, to help fix and solve their issue. Now, does that mean it's going to happen overnight? No. It didn't take you overnight to have the problem. It's not going to be fixed overnight either. And when you have more tools at your disposal and a bigger lens and target to aim for, you can fix those problems very easily, sometimes, depending on the issue. But if you're coming to this with major health issues, it might take you a little while to actually feel better and repair things, but that doesn't mean you won't. It just means we have to continue driving metabolic momentum in the direction that's going to make you better. Okay? So from a pro-metabolic standpoint, lots of people can benefit from it. It's not just, oh, I want this to be healthy and feel good and have a better sex drive. It's also, I'm trying to deal with this particular health issue or this particular injury or this particular overall disease predisposition that I have or whatever's going on. It encompasses everything for everyone because there is no set parameters. You can borrow concepts and tools and use them as you need. Okay? So here's a couple guidelines that set apart a pro-metabolic approach. We're very much interested in our stress levels. Okay, so stress is kind of a broad, nebulous term. When I say stress to clients, one of the first things they think about is like psychological stress. And that can be a part of it, but if we think about what stress actually is, stress is really just any demand for resources that is being placed on your body. And in particular, the response to any demand for resources. So when we have a stress or a stressor that's interacting with our body, that causes our body to have to respond and adapt. And on the other side of that, if I don't have resources, if I can't appropriately respond and adapt, well, now I have to have a stress response that could potentially be something that strengthens me. So think working out, that's a stressor. If you have enough recovery time, you can recover, you can get stronger and build big muscles and be faster and do all the athletic things you care about. But if I don't have adequate recovery resources, now it became a problematic stressor. So the difference there is the terms distress and eustress. Distress, I can't recover from. Eustress, E-U-S-T-R-E-S-S, eustress is a stressor that created a reaction that my body then responded to appropriately with no negative response. Distress opens the door to the aging process. It opens the door to things like messed up metabolic function and metabolic pathways that can potentially promote disease states. So we want to stay away from that and go towards things that are more manageable, things that we can adapt to appropriately. Okay? The other side of the Or another piece of the pro-metabolic approach is perceive, think, act. If you spend enough time in this community, you'll hear that slogan often. Perceive, think, act. And what that means, and this is a quote from Ray Peat, what that means is that you're perceiving your situation. You're perceiving what's going on inside your body. You're perceiving what's going on around you. You're perceiving your biological state. You're thinking about that state, and then you're acting on that. You're making a decision during the think state, and then you're acting on that. I feel something. What does that mean? What do I do with it? That's perceive, think, act. And that is the basic premise of the pro-metabolic diet. That's it. If you were to summarize it, those 3 words would summarize the pro-metabolic approach. There's more nuance to it, I know. We'll get there. But in general, that's what we're looking at. Giving you the ability to think and perceive your situation, think about your situation, and make a decision and act upon that information. And then you go back through the loop. You go back through the cycle of experimentation. The other thing that we're looking at in the pro-metabolic world is the idea that your metabolism, bioenergetics, is going to create the health that you want. That's an improvement in mitochondrial function and energy production, and this runs counter to the idea of genetic determinism. Genetic determinism, for those that aren't familiar, is the idea that your genes determine your destiny. Your genes determine if you're going to have heart disease. Your genes determine if you're going to have cancer. Your genes determine if you're going to get sick. And that's simply not true. And if we looked at the research on genetics, we can say with 100% certainty that genes play a very small role, if any, in your health. And that if you have an appropriate environment, if you have an appropriate bioenergetic situation, genes are much, much less important than people tend to play them up to be. So we're very much interested in, can I improve your mitochondrial function, your metabolic state, and is that enough to override whatever genetic predisposition you may or may not have? So that's a big part of what we're looking at. So 3 things you can do today to improve your health through a metabolic lens. Number 1, and this is the big one that a lot of people will often miss in other diets. Pay attention to how you feel on an ongoing basis. Okay? Pay attention to how a food makes you feel. If you eat a certain food, does your gut get messed up? If you eat a certain food, do you lose energy afterwards? If you eat a certain food, do you have brain fog? Do you have a hard time remembering people's names? Do you have a hard time falling asleep? If you don't eat a certain food, do you get cold hands and feet? Do you have weird symptoms that show up in relationship to your food? We want you to be aware of that, because if you start to then put that together, you start to realize that certain foods might be great for you and terrible for somebody else. And vice versa, what's great for somebody else might not be ideal for you. And that's okay. We want that information. We want that level of clarity. We want that level of detail so that you can individualize your approach for you. Okay? Secondly, this is an easy one for a lot of people, but it's also shocking for a lot of people, because a lot of people watching this video are going to come to this video from diets that don't allow this. Eat more fruit. As a general rule of thumb, fruit is very, very healthy, packed full of nutrition, and super easy to digest, especially if it's ripe. When people are coming into this with a stressed out state of suppressed metabolic function, we want to lower that stress. And one of the best ways we can lower that stress is to provide glucose. Glucose is sugar. Glucose is a carbohydrate. It's what all carbohydrates and sugars break down into eventually on a biochemical level. So what we want to think about from a glucose standpoint is lowering your stress levels. When you have a stress response, one of the things that happens is you create hormones called glucocorticoids. What a glucocorticoid is it's a steroid hormone that comes from the adrenal cortex that is made to increase your glucose. So you have a glucose producing steroid response to help you to deal with the stressors you're contending with. So if we increase carbohydrates, we oftentimes can lower stress hormones. And by lowering stress hormones, we can start a process of improving metabolic function. But if we're always in a stress state, we always have these hormones going on, what's going to happen is we're going to break down our own tissue to try and make more glucose. For one, that's a process called gluconeogenesis, the new generation of glucose. You're generating new glucose. And then from there, you constantly have to rely on breaking down and catabolizing your own tissue. You're eating yourself from the inside out to make new carbohydrates. So when that's the case, on the long term, you're going to lose organs, you're going to eat your own thymus glands, you're going to have lowered immune function, and that is a big part of why people generally don't feel healthy when they restrict stuff too much from their diet. Because eventually you run into that point where the stress hormones are fueling you by breaking down your own tissue. We don't want that. We want to avoid that. Fruit is an easy way to get you some carbohydrates, lower your stress levels, and help you start building up a system that doesn't need to run on breaking itself down, but can actually run on an outside fuel source that makes it easy to survive without stress. Okay, so fruit is an easy thing you can start to try and introduce into. Might need to start small and then work your way up. Start with something small and see how much you can handle and tolerate before you have any issues. Your meter is going to be different than somebody else's. That's the point. We want you to retain that self-experimentation and that bodily autonomy. Okay? And the third thing, and again, this is a big one. This is one I talk about often. Track the things that matter the most to you in your life. Okay? So what does that mean? When we think about health, a lot of times people will come from other diets and they'll have this idea in their head that health is just food and supplements and exercise. And if I exercise, I eat the right food, I take the right supplements, I won't die early. But the reality is health is life. Health is all the things you do in life. Health is your ability to move well. It's the energy you have to play with your kids. It's the relationships you have. It's the stress you have with your family on the holidays, or how stressed your family makes you on the holidays. Your relationships with your spouse, with your friends, with your loved ones, and how well you handle all of those things in life are a direct reflection of your health. So if you have an area of your life that means enough to you to want to improve, or that you don't want to see get lost, it's worth monitoring that part of your life, to pay attention to that part of your life so you can look at how the foods, how the choices of movement and exercise and lifestyle decisions you're making are manifesting in those things that matter the most to you. Because you might find that food and supplements are awesome for you for changing maybe your movement or your energy or your sleep or your relationships. That's when you know that you're over the target. That's when you know that you found something that has a direct impact on the things that are big picture in your life. We don't want to think small picture. We don't want to think, oh, well, I'm just trying to treat this one blood marker. We want to think, how does this affect your life? Because if you lose sight of how your health shows up in your life, it's very easy to get lost and oversimplify things. And at that point, you're back in the old diet mindset. You're back in the mindset of these little tiny inconsequential things making the biggest difference, and they're not. The whole point of being healthy is to live a healthy life. And living a healthy life means having all these external things that matter to you going in the direction that you want them to. So I hope you found this helpful. Check out the link down below if you want to see more of this and this kind of information. Don't forget to subscribe. I will see you soon. Take care.